I have a fascinating job. I'm very lucky. I get to work with loads of stuff. My background is I trained as an osteopath in the 1980s. And then I found that I was really interested in a more holistic approach. So I started retraining as a psychotherapist, a coach, Ericksonian psychotherapist, an NLP master practitioner, and also I'm just completing my PhD in health psychology. And that means that I do lots of really fascinating things. Like I work with this young girl here who was so ill, chronic pain, chronic fatigue. She was a hopeful for the Olympic team for Norway, and she was just bedbound, and they thought she probably wouldn't make it out of hospital in the end. And this is her winning the Taekwondo Open in LA. She went on to represent Norway in the Rio Olympics. So that's quite amazing, not just to go from being ill to being well, but to be that well that you could take a fighting sport back on. This is Ed Stafford, who you may have seen. He's on TV quite a lot on the Discovery Channel. I was the performance coach for his world record-breaking attempt to be the first man in the world to walk from the source to the sea of the Amazon River. And he did do it, and probably nobody else will ever do it, because you probably don't want to be the second person to walk from the source to the sea. It took him, he thought it was, he planned the trip based on Google Maps. He thought it would take 12 months. It took 26 months, because as you know, Google Maps is not always quite as accurate as it should be. So I helped him to do that, which is a fascinating job. I also work for some of the largest corporations in the world who don't like to be mentioned by name, but you can probably guess who they are from this little image. And I take all these skills that I'm very lucky to learn, and we also apply them, this is where my PhD is focused, to some of the people who have the least in the world. So I work with street addicts on teaching them skills to help them change their lives. So a whole range of stuff. And my purpose today in these 45 minutes, set a timer so I know what time it is to try and explain some of what I do, particularly in reference to the conditions we're talking about. And the other thing I've been asked to do is to give some sense of some practical skills to help you start thinking about it in a different way, start moving your neurology forwards. It's going to follow very much on from what Bob's just talked about sympathetic nervous system. I'm going to try and keep it as simple as I can, but how can you practically start to make a difference? So a slightly different take on the brilliant work we've just seen. Okay, so in this 45 minutes, what if this could actually start to make a real difference? I'm going to talk about what the lightning process is, relatively briefly. A little bit about the science behind it, again, relatively briefly. If you want to know more about it, there's loads of evidence base and references I can point you towards on our website. But mostly I really want to focus on what can we give you that you can go away and go, oh, I can see how this might start to make a difference. Because it's your nervous system. The person who has the most influence on your nervous system is you, because it's your nervous system, except most of us don't know how we do that. How do you do that? How do you get inside the machine? How do you make a difference? Okay, so a little story of how it all began. So as I said, I started off as an osteopath in 1984, but my real dream was to be a rock guitarist. That's what I really wanted to do. And in my first year, where we studied, as probably Bob did, everyone does when you start studying medicine and anatomy and physiology, you start off here and you study the forearm and the arm and you work your way through the body. So we studied this. And then in my first summer, I had a party to celebrate my birthday, and then a disaster happened in which I severed my left arm at the wrist, or left hand. And it had nothing to do with a ferocious shark attack. It was something much more serious and significant. It was a motorhome. And we were pushing this thing. I was pushing it on the glass. Back in the day, glass wasn't tempered glass, just normal glass. People were pushing from the front, I was pushing from the back. We rocked the caravan. My hand went through the glass, but they were on the other side, so they didn't see it, and they kept on pushing it backwards and forwards. And so I was very lucky not to catch the arteries, because that would be terminal, but I severed the tendons, and particularly I severed the ulnar nerve. And the ulnar nerve is known as the musician's nerve because it controls the fine movements of the hand. And I knew this because I just studied it. I knew what I'd done. And I went to hospital, and they said, look, what's going on? And they said, well, you have severed your ulnar nerve. I went, okay, how long until I'll be back doing osteopathy and playing the guitar? And they said, you won't, because this is so badly damaged. When this happens, you're old. I was 20 at the time. I said, neurologically, you're old. It won't grow back. The best you'll get is some movement, but probably not the fine movement. And this wasn't the message I wanted to hear. So I demanded a second opinion. And the second guy said, you'll be left with a claw. And I said, I think I need some more experts, because I don't think you're right. I think there has to be a different answer. And I kept on asking. And eventually, after about 15, 20 prognoses or diagnoses, I found somebody who said, I think you will recover. And being the contrary 20-year-old I was, I decided to agree with them and discount all the other medical opinions. And as it happened, I did recover. I ended up actually recording albums, playing with Eric Clapton, taught myself to play the piano, and now my hands are pretty much identical in terms of their function. How did I do it? I think one of the most important things was believing it was possible and having somebody else that believed it was possible. There were lots of other things that were important, but without that, I'm not sure, and I met other patients with the same injury who didn't recover because they've been told this doesn't change. So it got me very interested in what is the influence of what people say, what medical opinion is, what we say to ourselves, the messages we get. How does that affect our neurology? Not just our mood. How does that actually affect our neurology? How does it affect our flight and fight response? How does it reflect and affect our sympathetic nervous system? So that's why I started to do this extra study, apart from osteopathy, to start to look at psychological influences, but not from everyone's crazy, more from what does the brain do to the body? That was the interesting place I was coming from. So a little bit about the lightning process, which came as a result of these inquiries, trying to find out how do we help people, particularly people who've got stuck. I used to get everyone's worst clients. So all my friends would go and see Phil. He's got some extra skills. I don't know what to do with you. So I'd get people that had been around the block many times. And mostly I was able to make some change, but some people seemed to resist my charismatic charms and didn't get well. And I was like, well, what do we do with these guys? Because they've come to me because nobody else knows what to do with them. What do we need to do? So I started a research project looking at what was going on. Was there something we could understand that had been missed? And I had to start looking in different places. As a result, the lightning process particularly is good for people with non-responsive issues, so things that don't seem to respond to traditional approaches, where you've run out of options. That's where it lives. So examples of these are persistent pain, chronic fatigue, ME, fibro, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, autoimmune issues, we've had a few of them mentioned today, and also, classic emotional stuff like anxiety, depression, OCD. But we see a lot of the physicality of illness. Sorry, could we just turn this light off just for a second? I think it would be easier to see this. Brilliant, thank you. So we've got here a couple of cases which mirror what Bob showed earlier. Oh, great, here we go. So you can see the typical discoloration that you'll often get, in this case in the feet, of a young girl. And this is her after doing the lightning process. So she's standing on that foot that didn't work. This is her climbing a rock afterwards. Another case here, again I've highlighted this one. You can see the redness and also the inability to bear weight the holding of the foot. Again, it's probably clearer the coloration here. This is the same child. You can tell from the same the coloured toenails, where clearly there's the colour has returned to how it should be. Walking, doing a little plie in ballet. And this is a young man. Again, a good classic presentation. Same feet, different colour. And within quite a short space of time as well. That's quite interesting. So nice changes. Now, does this mean everybody makes these changes? Of course not. But a huge number of people that we see do get these kind of changes. We've also got a lot of people, these people all had chronic pain. These are all completing their marathons and just sending in a photo saying, I thought you'd like to see this. And some of the biggest struggles that anyone can take on, anyone here ever had children? Being able to feel well enough to think, yeah, I can do this. I feel up to this, which is a pretty major kind of commitment, as we know. So there's many more of that, but that's just to give you a kind of flavour of the kind of changes that we're seeing. So what are we doing? Well, what we're interested in particularly is how can people change their physiology? How can their body get different? What is stopping it? Completely what Bob was just saying. What is getting in the way of normal autonomic function? So in case you're not clear on the wording here, autonomic, we have two parts to our nervous system. The bit that we control through choice, like I'm going to touch the table, and then the bits that we are doing but without even thinking, like your digestion, your sweating, your heart rate, that we're in control of, but it's at a kind of unconscious level. And that's your autonomic. It's a bit like the plumbing systems. And it's not very sexy. So medicine, it's always been kind of pushed to one side. In fact, when you study the nerves in massive detail, because first of all, they're very exciting, and secondly, they follow a very clear path pretty much in every human. The sympathetic nervous system doesn't. It's very variable. It's not very exciting because it does stuff like sweating and heart rate. So you don't spend nearly as much time, certainly when I train, I think it's probably the same with you, focusing on that. It just gets sidelined. And yet, how important is plumbing in this building, or electricity, or aircon? Those are the things that keep everything running. So we need to pay more attention to those. So we're very interested in the sympathetic nervous system, which is one part of this unconscious autonomic system, which has an effect on stuff like blood flow, temperature of the skin, the way hair grows, all the things we're showing in symptomatology, and is also very, very important, again, as Bob said, in pain. What we're looking at specifically is what can you do, he talked about working from the top, what can you do to get your brain sending signals down to your body that work better? What could you do about that? How can you switch on better function, like on the fuse box, resetting things, like with IT. When you ever ring up IT, they say, turn it on and turn it off again, and turn it on again. What can we do to get that firing like it should? And the other thing we're very clear about is it's not a fix because it's not a treatment. It's a training. So we're recasting the intervention. Instead of being, we will treat you, say, no, we're going to take you on as students, because the only person that can really change your neurological systems with the tools we're going to give you is you. In the same way, if you teach someone mindfulness, doesn't matter how mindful I am as a teacher, the thing that's really important is you learning how to be mindful. We have to teach you the skills, but you've got to do the practice. And there's a paper there that's recently published that identifies that, if you're interested. So, the neurology and the sympathetic nervous system. Very, very important to find a way to activate that and make a difference. But how can we influence these? And can we? Is there any evidence that we can actually shift the way that the nervous system works? There's some fascinating studies on drug tests. And one of the things you do with a drug is to get it through the FDA, you have to test it against a dummy pill. And the reason is that we need to show that it's more effective than just the fact you're being given a pill, which tells us a very interesting thing. It tells us that the process of receiving a pill in itself, even if it contains nothing, has some kind of effect, and they need to make sure the drug is better than just the dummy pill. But as a result, it means that placebos, these dummy pills, are the most tested drug in the whole history of mankind, because they're tested every time against the proper medicine. So there's loads and loads of evidence about what happens when you take a dummy pill. In fact, there were some friends of mine in the States in the 70s who were really interested in starting a new drug called placebo. And they tried to get it through the FDA, saying, look, here's all the evidence. The pill was going to come with a little booklet saying, if you have heart disease, 40% of you will recover. And then their cunning plan was 6 months later to produce extra strength placebo. So part of their research was looking at what is the evidence for placebos and why does it work? One of the most fascinating studies Bernie Siegel talks about was they had two groups, one on chemo and one on dummy chemo. And the group on chemo, as you'd expect, their hair fell out when they took the pill. But the group who were taking dummy placebo chemo, so pills that looked like chemo, they thought might be chemo, but were empty of any chemicals whatsoever, 40% of them lost all their body hair. Their eyelashes, eyebrows, all their hair fell out. And what is causing their hair to fall out? Not everybody did, but 40% did. What makes their hair fall out? It's nothing in the pill, so it's not the pill that's doing it. It's their expectation, it's their belief, it's their nervous system. So their beliefs are triggering some kind of physiological change that's changing the way the follicles are working, but their hair is falling out. So some of the research into placebos is quite fascinating. So for instance, if you give somebody a pill shaped like this, kind of white, headachy kind of pill, what do you call that in the States? What's that? Like an aspirin, yeah. Okay. Like an aspirin. It doesn't, and it's a placebo, so it doesn't contain anything. It will help a chunk of people's headaches and pain, but not nearly as much as if you give them exactly the same nothing shaped like this, because these are much stronger pills. Normally we associate this with powerful antibiotics or powerful painkillers. So both of these pills will contain nothing, but these second ones will have a much stronger effect, even though they have nothing. Even more powerful is single silver pills, a bit like those cake decorations you can get, little, you know. Give someone of those and say this is a very expensive piece of medicine, and they take it, they will get a much stronger response. Interestingly, not gold. Gold is considered to be antique and therefore old school. Silver is from the future. Yeah? So that's why it has a much more powerful effect. So anyone want to guess what is even more powerful than a silver pill in terms of placebo? Yeah, exactly. If you inject someone with a big chunk of nothing, they will go, whoa, that really stings. I've had proper medicine. Yeah. So there's a big impact on that. And so top of the tree in terms of medical placebos. Any guesses? Surgery. What do they actually do, placebo surgery? Yes, they do. They do. A nice study in '59 by Leonard Cobb where he compared doing a heart surgery where they tied off an artery, so they thought it would help reduce heart attacks. And he thought to himself, I wonder what happened if we did the same operation with actually, so made an incision, we don't actually tie off the artery. And he found they got better results, the patients who had the placebo surgery. So they stopped doing that operation at that point. They did the same in Houston in the 80s with knee problems. Where in this case, they had people going through proper surgery, so anesthesia and everything, and arthroscopy, so they made a little incision in the knee. And one group had real surgery, and the other group had pretend sham surgery, but they played a videotape so they'd have all the sounds of surgery going on to try and make it as controlled as possible. And they found the results were very similar. Even though people had loose bodies, bits of bone floating around in their knees, torn cartilages, ripped ligaments, that some people, not everybody, but some people responded to this pretend surgery in exactly the same way as they had real surgery. And the point of this really is to say there is stuff going on that is affecting these people's pain perception, physiology. in medicine, and so I'm just doing a PhD, so I've had to deal with all this stuff in research. The placebo effect is a nightmare. It's really annoying. It really messes up your data. And so most scientists really don't like it. It's a difficult thing. But actually, it's a really interesting phenomenon. What we want to be asking ourselves is, if people can respond in this way, so somehow they're triggering some kind of healing response, what we want to know is, how is that working? Can we replicate that? What can we do to encourage that interesting physiological change, which everybody seems to have on board? Also, the other thing about placebos, the study suggests that people are not placebo responders or not. It will depend on all sorts of factors. So, for instance, in Italy, if you give someone a pill that is blue, it has a much more powerful effect on men. That's because they think that because the men's football team is blue. It's one of the reasons Viagra is blue, actually, is partly that. Okay. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take you through a little experiment of how your brain can influence your neurology. I invite you to take part in the experiment because it's quite a fascinating experience. What you're going to be doing is creating anesthesia. Anesthesia is reducing or turning off signals. Yeah? This is, what's this? It's a dental light. Everyone likes a dental light. Don't do this experiment if you don't like dentists. If you've got, most people don't love them, but if you've got a phobia of dentists, don't do it. Or if you've had some bad experience doing dental work, don't do it. But for the rest of you, if you're intrigued by seeing what you can do to your nervous system very quickly in terms of changing your perception of pain or increasing your numbness, then what I'd like you to do is just lean backwards a little bit in the chair. If you've got a light to look at, that will help. And imagine you're at the dentist. Okay? As I say, only do it if you're comfortable with this idea. But go to the dentist in your mind. And I'd like you to imagine you're there in the dentist. You can have a sniff. You can smell the smells of the dentist. Yeah. You can there'll be some music playing in the background like it has. If it's a dental practice with a couple of surgeries, you may hear in another room, someone's busy. Yeah. So just imagine you're there, and you're sitting in the chair, and the dentist, who tends to sit on your right-hand side, says, okay, we need to do a little bit of work here, so I'm just going to make things a little bit more comfortable for you by giving you a little blocker. Yeah? And so then what I'd like you to do is take your finger and just hook it actually physically into your mouth, and just pull your gum, your cheek away from your gums. And maybe you can even taste the latex of the glove, that. And sometimes they also put the cotton padding in. That makes your lip a little fat. And then they say, well, I'm just going to give you the injection. So just do that. And then they normally say, oh, where'd you go on your holidays at the same time? And go, ha, 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 ha. And then they inject the Novocaine or whatever it is. Yeah? And you start to feel that feeling. Keep your finger just there. Start to feel that feeling of, I don't know how you would describe it. I always think of it as cold, first of all, and then fat, and then tingling. And you feel the tingling feeling running maybe towards your mouth or up or down. And then what I'd like you to do, just stroke your left and right side of the outside of your face, and a chunk of you, a proportion of you will notice there's a change in sensation. Just stick your hand up in the air as you notice that change in sensation. Keep your hands up for me, yeah? So have a look around the room, just see there's a chunk of people, probably about 20 people with their hands in the air. Now that's interesting. Right? And for some of you that will last for a while. And you may even find if you say sausages, it will sound like sausages. You may even get a temporary paralysis. That can happen. Whenever I do this, I always start to get it on this side because I talk about it. If we have longer, we could probably get 50% of you in about 5 minutes getting into a degree of altered sensation. If we had pins, we could stick pins in your face, and we would get a change in your ability to experience it. It would feel more blunt. So for those people who have that experience, what's happening? What's going on? You've got an altered sensation as a result of what? What's caused it? Well, what's caused it?
In other words, you're preparing for what's coming.
Yeah, you're getting prepared for it. Expectation, yeah. So we've got reaccessing the memory, going back into the experience. We've got a posture, if we can get you in more into that position and looking at a light and reimagining the experience. We've got words, me talking you through it. And this allows us to somehow change our neurological activity. What's particularly interesting about this is this cuts both ways, in that words and re-engagement with memory will change experience. In this case, we're increasing anesthesia and numbness, but it works exactly the opposite way, in that we can switch up sensitivity. We can switch on activation of not so good pathways. So the work I do a lot, which I'm going to be doing with the British Olympic team and medical schools and GP training sessions, a lot of what I talk about is not so much how to teach people to create anesthesia, all that's quite fun. More interestingly, what are you doing, it comes back to Bob's first slide, that may be actually causing activation of harmful neurology. The neurology that is already, turned up quite high is getting nudged and pushed again without anybody intending to, but to bring an awareness of what are our words doing? What pathways are we switching on? So I want to introduce a friend of mine, which is neuroplasticity. Quite a complicated word, but really, really interesting. Anyone who's already heard of neuroplasticity? Okay, well done. So I took the GP's conference the other day, and only about 4% of people have heard of it. That's because it's a relatively new, familiar phenomenon. It's been around for a while, but it wasn't in medical textbooks when I was training. So neuroplasticity, long word for something very important. Neuro, the brain, nervous system. Plasticity, the ability to change shape. So in a minute, we're going to see a little signal running along this red pathway. It comes to a synapse. So a synapse is a gap. In the same way, there's a power station somewhere over there producing electricity, and electricity comes into the wires, but it's only when we flick the switch that it turns the light on. So the gap, the synapse, the switch, gives us an opportunity to switch on and switch off pathways, okay? So in this case, here comes the signal, it comes to the gap, and in this case, it goes down to this kind of dark red pathway. If this happens again, and again, and let's say this pathway goes towards pain, then neuroplasticity comes into play, which says, if you use a pathway a lot, we will make it easier for you to use it. It's a bit like predictive text. Who loves predictive text on your phone? And when it guesses what you're going to say based on what you normally say, it's such a useful thing. It works all the time. Well, some of the time. That prediction is useful to a degree, but it does mean that words that we use a lot, it starts to recognize and recommend that's what we're doing. The brain does the same. Use a pathway a lot, it actually changes the shape of that synapse. You saw the dark red one came in and the green one went away. And so there's a movement, an actual physical movement at synaptic junctions, which then means it's much easier to shift the signal down this pathway. So the more you use a pathway, the stronger it becomes. So as a result, neuroplasticity is a nightmare. But it isn't. Neuroplasticity doesn't care what pathway you're using. It just goes with the rule, whatever you use the most will make easier to use. So therefore, neuroplasticity is your hero. Because if you then start to push your signals up into the pathway of comfort, relaxation, whatever it may be, happiness, it's a bit more tricky to start with because your brain's got wired against that way. But if you push it that way, it will change in exactly the same way because, and this is the key thing, neuroplasticity is always on. It's always there. The brain never loses its ability, until we go, never loses its ability to rewire.
So we're trying to rewire our brain to go the path.
Exactly, yeah.
To go a different path.
Yeah. And what Bob's doing, a lot of what he's doing is the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like, how do we get those pathways that we want to wake up, and how do we shut off and sedate the pathways? Yeah. Oh, okay, come back to this. So what I'd like you to do, you have to think about words. The next thing we're going to talk about is words, very, very important. So with words, words have a power in that they trigger pathways. But there's another problem with words in that if I say to you, I'd like you to not think about Albert Einstein sitting on the back of the goat, okay? And he's got a backpack, and in his backpack there's an octopus, and the octopus has 8 tentacles, and in each of the tentacles has a different flavored Baskin-Robbins ice cream, okay? Don't think about that. What flavor were the ice creams? You know, you cannot help but think about those things, right? So we've got to be careful, not just in terms of what words we use, but very often when we say to people, what do you want? They'll say, not this, not pain. But of course, as soon as we say the word pain, we're actually triggering the pathway that we don't want to be triggering. And this is one of the issues the doctors have and we have to help them with, is like, how do I take a case history from someone and evaluate what's going on if some words are actually going to be triggering the pathways we don't want to be triggering? And you can't always avoid it, but you can avoid it a lot of the time. So next thing is, I worked with these guys, chronic pain consultants, and they said, can you help us? You've worked with some of our most difficult clients and you've got results we just couldn't imagine. I said, okay, the first thing we need to look at is your language. Because what's happening is you've got people with chronic pain or complex pain. And as a result, through neuroplasticity, those pathways have become very fast, very effective. Just because if you've got it, what are you going to be thinking about all the time? It's just part of your experience. Everything has to be measured. Can I get there? Are there stairs? Is there a ramp? What do your friends say when they meet you? Normally, how's your... Yeah, of course they do. They care. So as a result, this becomes a very, very fast-running pathway. So you get a message from your chronic pain consultant that says, please come to our chronic pain clinic. You go to their car park. Usually, I don't know if it's the same here, but in the UK, they have a special car park for the chronic pain clinic. And you go up the ramp to the chronic pain receptionist. He says, welcome to the chronic pain center. Please have a seat in the chronic pain waiting area. There's some leaflets you can read while you're here, and maybe you can fill in a little form, questionnaire all about your... And so you do. And you read how to cope and manage with the pain. And then they say, okay, your chronic pain consultant will see you now. Go down the corridor. He's first on the left. You knock on the door. He says, my name's Dr. Phil. I'm your chronic pain consultant. How are you feeling? Well, unfortunately, that extra bit of wiring probably hasn't helped you answer that question in a positive style. Right? So I said to these guys, okay, what do you want for your patient? I'll take that slide off for a second. What do you want for your patients? That doesn't mention the word pain. And they went, right, got it. Went away, came back 15 minutes later, said, can we have another 15 minutes? 30 minutes later, they said, yes, we have an answer. What we want is relief. And I said, relief from what? And they said, well, pain, because actually the word relief references pain. They couldn't come up with a word for what they wanted because they swim in the neurology of pain. That's what they do all day. I said, well, let's find out. What words could they have used instead of in terms of what they wanted for their patients? What's that? Joy, that would be great. Comfort, very good. Anything else? Hope, yeah, very good. So I said all these words. What about supple, loose, flowing, easy? And they went, those are words. Yeah, we never use them. Yeah. And they didn't. They even, as some of you may know, they even have a journal which in big red letters is called pain. And you have to worry for these poor people. They spend all their lives swimming in that neurology, their whole careers. They talked about doing nerve resections where they chop nerves because the pain's going so bad they think it was the only thing we could do. Anyone seen this before? Visual analog pain scale? Yeah. Based on what I've said, can you notice any words that neurologically might be causing trouble here? Yeah. Yeah? If you remember when I talked about going to the dentist, I said take yourself back to the dentist. This particular question, pain as bad as, in order to even answer the question, what's your pain like? The first thing they're saying, remember the worst time you've ever had in your whole life. And now tell us how you're feeling. It's kind of crazy. So I said to them, do you use this? And they went, yeah, we use this all the time. After we've done nerve resections, when people come round, we do this every 10 minutes. Like, what? You do this every 10 minutes? So they changed it. Because you can just say, how comfortable are you? Yeah. But what you want to do, clinicians, you want to think about this, but the majority of people who are not clinicians, caregivers and people who are experiencing this, you want to start thinking, what am I saying to myself? How much time do I use these words? And quite often we find when we work with people, we have to work as much with their carers, because their carers will say, you okay, do you want to sit down, is that all right? Because you care, but actually all that does is take it further into that neurology. You could still say the same thing without actually triggering the neurology you don't want to be doing, in conjunction with everything else you're doing. Okay, also the word visual analog will freak people out. So the lightning process takes 3 days to train in. If you want to know more, you can go to the website. I'm not really going to talk too much about it. Amanda and me will be around to talk about it later with you if you want to ask questions. And I have 10 minutes to teach you some more stuff. So let's quickly bundle through this. So we've got a little acronym for you, COR, going from SOAR to CORE. What we need to do is think, what can we do to change our nervous systems? Because, of course, where is pain? Pain is one of those things. It's quite difficult to do this lecture without mentioning the P word, which I barely say the rest of my life. But when we have it in our foot, it really feels like that's where it is. But it isn't. It's here. It's where we're processing. That's where we're experiencing it. It's in our nervous system. And our nervous system, as we've seen, is very changeable. So what can we do to change it? How can we open up different pathways than the ones that we've unfortunately got quite familiar with? How can we rewire for possibility and hopefulness? And how can we exercise positive states? There's lots of great research coming out now about when you go into positive memories, it affects your cortisol response. It affects the neurology. It affects loads of stuff. And equally, when you go into not so good states, not so good memories, which of course we're bound to if we're sitting at home feeling not very happy in our body, it's not going to be conducive for thinking about good states. So we've got some work to do. So this slide, if this is your old pathway going into trouble, what's good is that it's a bit more complicated than that. There are other nerves that join at that synapse that will have an influence on whether it goes that way or this way. Anything you can do to trigger the other nerve pathways, anything, will help the signal go the way you want it to go. So choose your words. First thing, choose your words. Really clock how many times you are saying the P word, the hurt word. It will be natural, and this is what we find, people will often be saying it every 2 or 3 seconds, thinking it, which is reasonable, but neurologically that's not helpful. So really thinking about that in a different way. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's natural, it's familiar, but it's not going to help. Secondly, slow down. What you usually find, the sympathetic nervous system activity is increased by stress, anxiety. If you talk to somebody who's stressed, how do they sound? They don't go, hey, I'm really stressed at the moment. They go, 100 miles an hour, yeah? High-pitched, fast voice. If you were able to listen inside their head, you'd hear something similar, yeah? So slow thoughts. So I'd like to just say this phrase out loud to start with, going, it's a lovely day. Just say it like that. It's a lovely day. Okay. Thank you. It is a lovely day. Then I'd like to just practice saying it twice as slow. Now, you should be good at this. One of the things when I train people, I say, imagine you're from the deep south, and you've got a southern drawl, y'all, and you're slow. Take it slow. So slow it down. Say it half the speed. So it's a lovely day. And just practice. It doesn't really matter what you say. It's about training your brain to move more in the direction you want it to go to. Think of this. Is that a little doggy over there?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a little doggy over there. I've got a dog. I love my dog. Dogs are very clever. If you say to them, if they know the word walk, you're going to go for a walk. If you say to them, sorry, you can't go for a walk today, what do they hear? Walk? Yeah. Our brains are the same. Equally, if you find a dog and you don't know it, it doesn't know you, and it looks a bit scared, how would you talk to it? You would go, come on, it's okay, because you know that would stress it out. You would, and they don't really speak English or American. They hear the sound of your voice mostly. Our brains are the same. We need to start training our brain in a calm way, in a quiet, compassionate way. Often, again, with pain, people get quite annoyed with themselves. Like, what is the matter with you? Nervous system. Which, again, triggers sympathetic arousal and exactly the wrong kind of biochemistry. So slow your thoughts down. Think about your speed. Also think about your breathing. There's quite a cool tip, which is if you just have thoughts or conversations in your head on your out-breath, have you noticed when we speak, we only speak when we breathe out? It's quite difficult to speak when you can't breathe when you speak in. You can only speak on the out-breath. But our thoughts, they're 24/7. What if we just had some of those thoughts on the out-breath? And on the in-breath, just took a little break from those thoughts. So that only half the time, immediately, we'll be thinking some stuff. This will all help to reset the sympathetic nervous system. There's loads of other stuff you can do, but just as a starting point. Yeah? How do we open up new pathways? Number one, start focusing on empowering memories. It's natural if you've got symptoms, that's going to take up a chunk of your time. But what you want to do is actually swap it around and have, let's say, if you have symptoms, who thinks about their symptoms, would they say, 50% of the time, waking hours, yeah? More than 50%? What if you swap that around? So that you were thinking about wellness, happy. Who's had great times in their lives? Yeah? What percentage of the time do you think about your great times compared to the not so good times you're currently experiencing? For most people, there's quite an unfair weighting. Instead of appreciating life, they're like, I've got to pay the bills, do the shopping. And at that point, in terms of mindfulness, they're not present anymore. They're in some catastrophic future or thinking about bad pasts. We don't spend enough time engaging with the neurology of health and healing. It's natural, but it's not useful. It's a bit like the dental example. When we go into the dentistry and we get our anesthesia, it's because we're accessing neurology. How are we doing for time? Focus on unfamiliar, healthy parts of your body. So if your foot is your thing, what's the back of your ear like? Really focus on that. What's your belly button doing? Where's your collarbone? Put your neurological focus somewhere else. There's more you could do, but these are just like starting points. Rewire. So the sympathetic nervous system is triggered by many things. One of the things it's triggered by is threat and stress. Feeling stuck naturally increases that. If you feel stuck, you don't feel happier. So start to put some energy into reminding yourself, like the guys have been talking about today, about hope. Ask yourself this, and you can have these slides so you don't need to write it down, but this is something worth remembering. As this is something that others have influenced positively. Okay, as this thing I have, everybody in this room, if you've got stuff, there's somebody out there who has influenced that in a positive way for themselves. Then I will find my own way too. Whatever that way is for you. Yeah? It doesn't have to be my way or Bob's way, but your way. And kind of keep that as a conversation going. To help that, think about, okay, when did I bet everybody in the room's got one of these. When did you achieve something that other people said, you'll never do that? Yeah, so my hand, you'll never recover. Yeah? Who's got one of those? Somebody said, you won't do this. What did they say? You won't.
They said you'll never get the address changed to the one you want it to be.
You never get that changed. Yeah? Who else has got something? Yeah, shout out from the back. Never get a high school degree? Fantastic. You're right at the back. You have to shout very loud, grey jumper or grey shirt. Yeah? Say again. Right. Wow. Yeah, round of applause. When you remember those moments, and I'm sure everybody's got one when they bucked the trend, when they said, that's not happening to me, let me show you. That reminds you of your extraordinariness, which is a very, very important thing to do. To be, in statistics, we talk about this bell curve. And what we're interested in is generally what the population does is the bit in the middle. But the bits on the outside are the outliers, the bit people who respond interestingly. And in statistics, they're annoying because they mess up your stats. But they're the kind of interesting people. Yeah. So think about your states, what thoughts are you having? Exercise, put your energy into thinking about some good memory. Make sure every day you thought about more good stuff, more good memories. We have a storehouse of great memories. Okay? So change your nervous system, open up new pathways, rewire for possibility, exercise positive states. Start thinking about that in neurology. You think, well, I'm doing loads of other stuff. What can I do? It doesn't cost you anything. It's nice. It will make a difference. Amanda, you wave, Amanda, is in Portland. Barrett, who's not here today, is in California. We've got some more practitioners who are just about to finish their training, so this is where you go to find out about it. The last thing I'd like to show you is this, which I really like as a bit of a study. It's done by Penn State. So they looked at the heart rates for congestive heart failure in these various counties. It looks like it's the Great Lakes. That's, I think, Lake Michigan, is it, or Superior? But so the redder, the more incidence of heart disease. Okay, make sense? Yeah. Then can you see that at the back, roughly? Then what they compared it with is something called big data. So big data is where you take Twitter feeds of all the people in that area, and they looked for words of frustration and anger and unpleasantness, like, I hate this sucks, I'm so annoyed, I hate it. And they mapped the prevalence of those words in the same counties. And this is what they found. That the Twitter feeds were more predictive of knowing the smoking rates or obesity rates in the counties. So, something to think about. When people say your words don't really make a difference, they do. So, lightning process and effective training for a range of issues. There is some research on that I can tell you about. Uses the conscious control of neurology to change your physiology. It requires application, like we just talked about today. It's the only person that can think of good memories is you. If you're interested in learning more, then do come and talk to us. So we're happy to talk to you about it. It's not for everybody because it's horses for courses. If that translates as is that a phrase you use here? Horses for courses? Some things work for some people, some things don't. What's the American equivalent of horses for courses? Yeah. We have a few copies of a book which talks about some of this over there. I only managed to bring about 6. If you're interested, you're welcome to buy one from us. Thank you so much for your attention. Sorry I've slightly overrun. Apologies to you because I think you're on next. Thank you very much.